With that said, my expectations have been slightly raised with this Black Ops Cold War game, but because it is a Call of Duty game at the end of the day, I am still going in cautiously optimistic. I'm starting to think more and more that Modern Warfare could actually end up getting an extra year in the spotlight while Treyarch works on Black Ops Cold War for an extra year to release sometime in 2021. The Black Ops Cold War teaser, trailer thing, I guess you could call it, officially dropped today, and I watched it while I was in the car. It honestly, it looks pretty cool. I can't lie, it looks pretty cool. So my initial thoughts on Cold War's multiplayer are that I actually do quite enjoy it as of right now. However, I liked what I've played so far, but that can change as easily as it could stay the same. Well, it's been some time since I last made a COD review, hasn't it? As many of you may know, I, Johnny Seizure, am a YouTuber that frequently makes game reviews. I've been doing YouTube for almost 5 years now, and my most frequent series of review subjects is Call of Duty. My first review of a Call of Duty game I ever did was a review of Call of Duty World at War from April 7th of 2018. The video isn't very good and there's vast room for improvement in it, but since then I've made a lot more COD reviews. After some time, I decided a while back that my 12th review of a Call of Duty game, which would be my review of the newest game in the franchise, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, would be the final COD review I make. That being said, here we go. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War is the newest game in this annually released Call of Duty franchise, released on November 12, 2020, and much like every other Call of Duty game that's come out on a yearly basis, there's a lot to say, and my opinions on it differ depending on which aspects of the game we're talking about. I made a video way back in November when the game came out, giving my first impressions on the game based on the very minuscule amount of content from the game I had experienced up to that point. Seeing as now about 5 months have passed since I made that video and I've experienced just about everything this game has to offer on a content basis, I'm going to make the full review. My name is Johnny Seizure, and here goes the Black Ops Cold War review. Before I go over anything else about the game, I have to talk about its technical aspects and issues. Now, first off, I have to state that the Call of Duty franchise has never had the best track record with their games being technically efficient. I point primarily to World War II's launch and matchmaking glitches in Infinite Warfare and BO4, and Cold War really seems to be no different. There are a myriad of technical issues that I've witnessed myself in this game, but allow me to express some. First off, missing textures or player models glitching out in the loading screens. Treyarch brings back the player model in the menu type beat from Cold War. Now, this is nothing new. Multiplayer games have been doing this for years, and COD has as well, so it's nothing new for them either. They've had it in Black Ops 3, World War II, and Modern Warfare 2019, but the thing that differentiates those games from Cold War is the fact that in those games, even World War II, you can actually see the player model displayed on screen. Cold War, on the other hand, doesn't like that idea and would rather the player model be missing both textures and body parts, and sometimes the entire player model is missing and there's just a floating XM4 in the menu screen. Now, you may look at that and be like, well, it's a brand new game, and I have two responses to that. I hereby note down that I encountered this in May of 2021, which is funny that people would be defending that for a game that came out last November. The second response is the obvious one, and it's the fact that it should go without saying that developers and publishers should just release a finished game at launch instead of releasing a shell of what they promise consumers and then fulfilling said promise later. Another thing I have to point out is the startling amount of lag, glitchiness, and untextured visuals in the campaign's cutscenes. I don't want to say too much simply because I'll talk about the campaign when I get there, but the cutscenes in the campaign are horrendous when it comes to being glitchy and untextured. On top of that, when it comes to the UI, I don't like how they changed the menu when Season 1 dropped and Treyarch just combined it with Warzone and Modern Warfare. The start menu just looks so closed in and bad now, when previously it actually looked pretty good and condensed into everything it needed to be. You had the campaign on one third, multiplayer on another, and zombies on the last. That was all there really was to it. Nothing more needed to be done with it. This made it increasingly frustrating when Treyarch just fucking slid it into being next to Warzone and Modern Warfare. If somebody is buying Cold War, they are buying it to play Cold War. If they want to play Modern Warfare or Warzone, why can they not just launch that? The UI also reminds me a lot of the one that was in Modern Warfare, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess, even despite the HUD being literally the exact same thing. Cold War's sound design is okay. It's nothing really super special, I think. The pack-a-punch weapons and zombies sound the best they ever have, I think, but at the same same time, I think some of the weapons just sound generic and not like weapons. Modern Warfare 2019 had what I think was by far the best sound design in the entire franchise because of how beefy and visceral the weapons and sound effects sounded. It made for a far more guttural experience, and you can definitely tell that it's what Infinity Ward was going for. You can also tell that Treyarch was attempting something similar for the sound design in Cold War, and it doesn't necessarily come off the same way. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the weapons and sound effects are pretty beefy and cool, and the explosions are too, but they don't replicate the vibe that it looks like Treyarch were going for. Also, adding on to the list of UI-related complaints I have, the friends list feature for Battle.net is pretty broken. I would try to invite a friend to a match of multiplayer or zombies only to not be able to because the game says they're offline even though they aren't, and not being able to play the game despite both sides having a decent connection. I am 100% completely certain I'm not the only one who's experienced this, and it'd be nice if Treyarch actually went and fixed it. Some nicer things I have to say about this game's technical aspects are the fact that visually it looks fantastic. Add to that the stuff like DLSS and RTX and it makes the visual experience even better. It's also nice how a COD game finally has an FOV slider that's available for all platforms of the games. PC versions have had it for years, but console players have gone without it for a long time, and it's nice that they finally have it. Also, besides that, the looks for a lot of the weapons are really nice and clean. It's extremely well done in that regard. Other than that, Cold War is a bit of a technical mess. I understand that a year of development was basically shortened on it, and Sledgehammer had to pass the remains to Treyarch, and Treyarch had to make their magic with it, but still, oh my god. On a technical level, this game is borderline early access, and I don't find that acceptable for a game that's been out since last November, and still being such a mess. What's funny is that this game was more held down technically at launch and only got worse as time went on, basically being a weird reverse sense of a game like Battlefield 4. Cold War doesn't get a pass for still being a glitch fest so many months after its release, because Treyarch missed a year of development. Even games that had some of the most unthinkable launches I can think of cleaned up by this point in their life cycle. And while Cold War does have some good stuff in it from a technical standpoint, the bad far outweighs the good. The gameplay in Cold War is just about what you've come to expect from pretty much every single Call of Duty game nowadays. Now, I will admit, it is a dramatic step up from Treyarch's last effort with Black Ops 4, and also might be better than Black Ops 3, and I also think it feels very similar to Modern Warfare 2019, but also in some ways a significant downgrade. I'll start off with the good. First off, the movement is incredibly smooth. It feels nice to slide around and traverse the areas of the map so easily. Besides that, the gunplay is pretty great too. Cold War brings back the gunsmith feature from Modern Warfare 2019, and as a result, the customization is so much better than it would have been if Treyarch had just used the Pick 10 system again, which is something I feared they would do, and I'm really glad they didn't. The weapons are efficient as well for the most part across all three of the game's core modes. The camos look nice too for the most part, although some of them just kind of look ugly. Once again, the core gameplay feels mostly similar to last year's Modern Warfare, so if you played a ton of that, you'd be familiar with this for the most part. It feels a lot like if you combine the gameplay style of Modern Warfare 2019 with the art direction and style of BO1, and that looks and feels great, especially given the weapons and the way the maps and environments look, plus the gunplay and similar immersion from those games. It almost feels as if it's a complete reimagining of the original Black Ops from within the newer style of COD games, similar to how Modern Warfare 2019 felt that way with COD 4. Some things I don't like very much about the gameplay is how some of the controls feel a little off, at least the mouse and keyboard controls. It's not a huge complaint at all, and I'm not trying to treat it like it is, but E to melee feels kind of weird to me. Another thing I don't like about the gameplay is how in multiplayer operators are back. I never really got the importance of operators in Modern Warfare, Warzone, and I still don't get it in Cold War. The only place it really worked was Black Ops 3, 4, and Infinite Warfare because they actually impacted the gameplay in any way. You could say to get cool skins and customization to grind for, but I always felt like COD's player customization was always better in games like Ghosts, and that does sound like a joke, but it's not. I genuinely mean that, where you could just take a player model and put a bunch of cool stuff on it without preset limitations. Say what you want about games like Ghosts or Advanced Warfare, and I certainly have my own opinions when it comes to those games too, but the in-depth player customizations in those games was far superior to what COD is doing nowadays. Like, playing as Woods is cool and all, but at the same time, it's not something I really care that much about. I see it, say it's cool, and I move on. Remember this because it's going to come into play later when I talk about another section of this game. In total conclusion, it feels a lot better than Treyarch's last game, and the overall gameplay is nice, but it is heavily flawed. Cold War multiplayer is, to put it simply, a very mixed bag. There is a lot about it that I like, and there is probably a bit more about it that I dislike. To start off, the most important factor is that the skill-based matchmaking in Cold War is very easily the worst it's ever been, without a shadow of a doubt. It's actually pretty fun for a while until you get to a high enough rank to the point where the game sees it and then only puts you into a bunch of matches where you get steamrolled by sweats. On another hand, I am actually pretty glad that Treyarch brought back prestiging to COD games, but once again, as soon as you get anywhere close to that Prestige 1 emblem, the sacred Cold War matchmaking comes in and swoops down on you only to dump you into a match of sweats for the rest of time. You do get your occasional fine match without any sweats or tryhards, and that is actually quite fun, but it's only when it's consistent, which albeit is quite rare. It's funny to me how Call of Duty has been considered the multiplayer shooter kingpin for so many years, yet its core fundamentals like its matchmaking are so inconsistent and non-ideal that it makes no fucking sense for the franchise to hold that title in the first place. Literally the only thing Treyarch has to do is implement a ranked lobby system into the game, leave casual lobbies for non-competitive people, and all will be completely fine. Just leave the casual players up to casual matchmaking, but people have been saying this for basically as long as skill-based matchmaking has even been around in COD in the first place, and nothing has happened. It's so frustrating that a game like Call of Duty has been going on like this for so long and it's only gotten worse while the developers have clearly heard complaints about it and just not done anything. With the whole skill-based matchmaking tirade now over, it's time for me to continue on talk about the rest of this game's fucking multiplayer. I'll start off by talking about the maps. The multiplayer maps in Black Ops Cold War are fine for the most part. The game only launched with 8 maps, which was an astoundingly low number for a multiplayer FPS to launch with in 2021. However, I can mostly excuse it considering the fact that Treyarch added new maps to the game pretty quickly, with Nuketown only dropping 2 weeks or so after the game's release. The best maps in my opinion are Miami, Nuketown, Moscow, Garrison is cool, and they all have their own reasons for being good. Miami has a nice color scheme, very much has an 80s vibe. Moscow reminds me of some good old COD 4 maps. Garrison is a pretty good standard 3-lane COD map, and well, Nuketown is Nuketown. These maps are really good and they're my personal favorites, but at the same time you also have maps like Satellite, Cartel, and Armada, which are some of the laziest maps I've seen in a COD game, possibly ever. Much like the good maps I just talked about all had their own reasons for being good, these maps definitely have their own reasons for being fucking bad. Cartel is uninspired and just downright boring to play in. I did say it was one of my least favorites from the beta, and that still rings true now. It's not a good map, it's incredibly boring. Armada feels way too big for what it is, and also just feels like 2 versions of Hijacked on the same map. The only difference was that Hijacked was a really good map, and then this isn't. And then Satellite is actually one of the worst COD maps of all time. It genuinely is probably bottom 5, and I'm not being hyperbolic about it. First off, the entire map is a bland desert devoid of all feasible life. Secondly, it's way too big, and third, all of the cover on the entire map is shifted completely over to a singular side of the map, and the rest of it is completely open. So if somebody happens to do something like call in an airstrike or a chopper gunner or literally anywhere else that you are, you're completely fucked. You aren't making it out of that alive. A common defense for a map like Satellite could possibly be, oh, just only use the parts of the map with cover in it, but there are a few problems with that. First off, you won't always spawn over there to begin with, so you never know. Secondly, why only use that part of the map when you should be able to traverse the entire thing to use it to your advantage? Other than that, you have maps like Checkmate. The biggest problems with Modern Warfare 2019's maps when the game first came out was the fact that they seemed to be specifically meant for one mode and one mode only. Checkmate is that, but in Cold War. Very much a search and destroy specific map. I loved Checkmate when the game first came out, but the more of it I played, the less I seemed to like it. It's a great idea for a map that has a pretty big kill house influence it seems, but all anyone ever does is camp with XM4s in the plane. This transitions me nicely into my next point, talking about weapons in multiplayer. Most people remember several months ago when this game came out, in multiplayer the XM4 and the MP5 absolutely destroyed everything in their path for like no reason. Thankfully now, in June of 2021, the balancing is better, but it could still be way better than it is. If there's one thing that I can say BO4 got particularly right with its multiplayer, it's the fact that nothing ever really felt broken into oblivion. Cold War launched with 2 weapons that were like that. Cold War launched having the MP5 and the XM4 being the most utterly disgusting weapons in the game, and even when they nerfed the MP5 and made a huge deal out of it, it was still pretty overpowered. The game's balancing is mostly all over the place as far as weapons go, and the same is mostly the case for kill streaks and lethals. The prox mines were the most annoying annoying thing for a while when the game came out, but thankfully Treyarch has toned them down a massive amount, so that's good. As for weapons, my personal favorites are the M16 and the AK-74U, despite the fact that the M16 isn't exactly underpowered in itself. It's not exempt from all the overpowered weapons I've been talking about. The XM4 has seemed to be the most popular option to pick from since it's the game's most popular AR, which I'm not too surprised about. It definitely fits that sort of mold. Another underrated weapon is the Hauer 77, which is the trench gun, which has appeared in previous COD games like COD 2 and World at War. Sniping in Cold War's multiplayer is somewhat reminiscent of BO1 in the sense that it's pretty boring and there's really only one good sniper to pick from, that being the LW3. The challenges are fun at first, but they get boring rather quickly. I went from super determined to unlock woods to not really caring anymore in the span of a couple days because, truth be told, the grind is too boring for me to really enjoy it all and care that much. In terms of modes, the standard ones like TDM, Domination, and Free-for-All, they're all still there and it's generally the same, but there's this new mode called Dirty Bomb. By this point, all three of the major COD dev teams have had their own weird experimental multiplayer mode. Sledgehammer Games did it first with War in World War II, a mode with big potential that lacked an execution and never really went anywhere. After that, Infinity Ward completely reinvented Ground War in Modern Warfare 2019, taking Battlefield 4 Conquest and being like, yeah, can I copy your homework? And I will admit, it was a fun mode, and now Treyarch is trying their hand in Black Ops Cold War with the mode Dirty Bomb. Completely unrelated to the entirely separate game also titled Dirty Bomb, although that is a good and fun game and you should play it. It feels like a weird blend of Ground War, Warzone, and Battlefield's Rush mode into one really weird mode, and honestly, I'm not really sure that it works. All the influences this mode has feel way too jumbled together and not blended enough to make this mode truly feel unique, as opposed to having it just feel like a mess of three modes and their mechanics mashed together without any actual thought. Way back in November when I did the first impressions video, I said this mode was an improvement upon Ground War and Modern Warfare, but I can't really say that with any actual honesty or confidence anymore now that I've actually played more of it. The other game modes are fine, but that's probably because they're the same modes that have been in COD multiplayer for literally as long as Call of Duty has been remembered. Add Cold War's horrendously forced skill-based matchmaking into the picture and it's not a pretty sight. I can't say with any actual genuine confidence that Cold War's multiplayer is actually really good. I'm glad I waited a while to write this because I can see things a lot clearer now than I would have been able to if I reviewed this right away. Ready for the most positive part of this whole review? Back in November when this game came out and I made my first impressions video, at the time of that video's release, as I stated in that video, I had only played through the first mission of the campaign. By now, all these months later, I've finished the whole thing twice. Once when the game first came out, and again when I went to make this video, and wow, I'm actually somewhat surprised. This was the best COD campaign in years. It's really short, it's only about 3 hours minimum, and I didn't no-life the whole campaign in one night like I did with Modern Warfare 2019, but I did finish it very quickly. This is the first campaign Treyarch has done in a while too, seeing as they skipped out on it last time. Even though when they showed the first teaser for the game back in August, I was expecting the campaign to be at least good, I wasn't expecting this. And when I heard they were bringing back stuff like branching dialogue options and multiple endings for the first time in a COD game in 8 years, plus the return of characters like Mason and Woods, I got super excited. I should also mention that if you're trying to avoid spoilers, don't watch this portion of the video. The campaign starts off with the protagonist of Black Ops 1, Alex Mason, in a restaurant with a character from this game, a character named Russell Adler. And for those of you who are familiar with the Black Ops 1 campaign and all the little stuff in it, you'll notice that this game starts off in basically the exact same way. Multiple people inside of a restaurant or a bar lit up by a cigarette and 2 or more men talking business. You go outside, you meet Woods, and spend the rest of the mission chasing after this guy for interrogation purposes, chasing after a plane, stopping a plane, and learning the general importance of the plot revolving around a supposed Russian myth named Perseus, a real-life Russian spy that actually existed and was said to be active around the time of World War II in the 1940s. This whole thing continues with a cutscene involving Mason, Woods, Adler, fucking Ronald Reagan, and Hudson all in the same room discussing the idea that Perseus is mostly a myth and that he ever did exist, he's already probably dead anyways. This cutscene also has Hudson state that Adler is the closest person to come to catching Perseus, which nicely introduces why Adler is actually important to this this game's story. Right away, everyone in this story at this point has an established form of importance, and none of it feels forced. Before I continue praising Cold War's campaign for everything it does right, I think it's only right that I also criticize it for everything it does wrong. First off, this game's portrayal of Woods is really disappointing, and despite all the complaints about the voice actor, that's really not even what I'm upset about. I actually think the new voice actor is fine. He does a good job, and he definitely does the best with what he's given. Am I a bit bummed that they didn't get James Burns to reprise their role and didn't even ask him? Honestly, yeah. Is he as good as James Burns? Fuck no, but I think the new voice actor for Woods is actually pretty good. No, my problem with Woods in Cold War's campaign comes mostly in the form of the fact that Treyarch stripped him of all of his actual character traits that made him an interesting character in the first place in order to just make him come off as the stereotypical military sergeant tough guy that swears a lot and says funny lines. In BO1, he's a hardened sergeant that doesn't take shit from anyone, and he actually has character, and that's expanded upon a lot in Black Ops 2 when he's more so of a father figure to David Mason. In Cold War, he's basically just a surface-level military sergeant tough guy, which is a bit of a shame because Woods is a far better character as far as writing goes than most people will give him credit. Also, a lot of the dialogue in the campaign is a little messy. Now, this is a Call of Duty game, so I'm not expecting this to be The Departed, and the dialogue isn't like the Star Wars prequels, but I also want you to keep in mind that the first two games in the Black Ops sub-series have the best dialogue out of any COD games hands down. So hearing Woods say,
"I'm a goddamn onion, Mason. You should know that,"
doesn't exactly achieve equal levels of what I would call good dialogue. Now on to the positives, because trust me when I tell you that there are a lot, and this game's campaign is easily the best part of the game. So first off, the introduction of the new character Adler. He's amazing and actually has importance to the plot, which is kind of funny nowadays. He feels like he has a reason to be there and feels like a real human being that's actually important to the plot instead of a... what the fuck's the guy's name from Black Ops 3? Actually, never mind, that proves my point. Anyways, Adler is a good and well-written character that serves importance to the story, and him being there is definitely necessary. Secondly, Treyarch managed to do the impossible. They brought back a more customizable character into a COD campaign where you can customize your name and even gender, and they even added a non-binary option for the gender, which was really cool. They gave you all of this customization and still gave you a good storyline to work off of from your character. Your character's name, while customizable, will always be referred to as Bell, and the story around the game and everything that goes on with the multiple paths and endings gives him actual character and something to work off of, something Black Ops 3 lacked. You first meet Bell in the second mission, which starts off in a warehouse where you meet your squad mates Park and Sim, and then you flash back to Vietnam in the year 1968 where yourself and Adler fight through Vietnam in an attempt to uncover information about Perseus. I'm also going to go up front and say that I don't like Park or Sim, because while they could have character and while they could have things going for them or built up, Treyarch makes it so that they're just the most mindless, dumb, and lifeless characters that you don't care about because they didn't build them into anything. Cold War has a grand total of about 3 campaign missions set in Vietnam, and they're actually all really good, especially the last one, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. This game has some really solid stealth missions too, like the mission Brick in the Wall, which involves Bell sneaking his way through the quiet streets of Berlin in order to identify information for Adler. It's the first stealth mission in the game, and what shines more in it than anything else is the environments and the visuals. It looks astonishing, and considering how jumbled this game's development was, I'm honestly surprised. Another good mission is a couple missions later where you play as Bell and Woods in a testing ground where you uncover audio logs of Hudson talking about something called Project Greenlight, a nuke underneath the surface that Hudson knew about the whole time but kept quiet over. Woods, in a fit of rage, goes back to Hudson and yells at him really loudly. I like this because not only does it represent internal conflict, but also gives additional context to Woods and Hudson's obvious dislike for each other. Speaking of story-related knowledge, stuff that increases your knowledge of what's going on in the campaign for Cold War are the side missions. Call of Duty and side missions are two things I never really thought I would hear in the same sentence unironically, but here they are, and honestly, I don't really hate them. I don't hate them, I don't love them, I don't really have an opinion. They're just kind of there, and I never really went back through them in my second playthrough of the campaign because I never saw much of a need to. They remind me of the Strike Force missions from the Black Ops 2 campaign, but also their own thing because they're way shorter and don't require nearly as much strategy. It's nice because the same detail and level design, while not still completely present because it's on a way smaller scale, is still there. Cold War's level design doesn't get enough credit or attention for being as good as it is. This leads me to point out one of my favorite missions in the game, that being Echoes of Cold War. It's definitely the most nostalgic mission of the whole game, and anybody playing it that used to play a lot of BO1 will understand that. First off, you play as Mason alongside Woods, and secondly, the environment looks a lot like the multiplayer map Summit way back from the original Black Ops. It was a very good mission to play through as well, a very well done mission, very well designed. Another one of my favorites is the mission titled Desperate Measures. This mission involves you infiltrating KGB headquarters as the character Belikov. You take care of business in a stealthy manner, and along the way you encounter familiar faces such as Krivchenko and Imran Zakayev. That's right, Imran Zakayev from COD 4 returns in Cold War. Like, all these months later, I still can't tell if this was just a quick cameo or if the Black Ops and Modern Warfare universes are actually connected and have been this whole time. Anyways, the final act of the game starts with the corridor-based Vietnam mission that ends up with Bell a little banged up, and Adler figures something is up and tries interrogation on him for days, and it leads to an amazing mission which involves Bell retelling the events of his newly discovered past with Perseus and MKUltra brainwashing through gameplay, and it's genuinely one of the most unique missions I've ever played in a COD game. After this, you can either choose to tell Adler the truth and give an actual location as to where all of this was going on, or lie to him, which leads to 3 different endings. One of these 3 endings is the one I see as the canon ending. Bell and Adler successfully living through the final mission, stopping a nuclear detonation, only for an ironic twist to come up where Adler betrays Bell and kills Bell, revealing himself to have been undercover the whole time. A second ending is where you lie to Adler and set up an ambush where the final mission is set to take place. Midway through this, Adler begins to question you, and you have the opportunity to trigger the ambush where you kill Adler, Woods, and Mason one by one. The third ending is that the nuke blows up and everyone dies. It's the first time a COD game has had multiple endings and branching options since Black Ops 2, and I'm so glad that it was actually good. It's the Black Ops 4 campaign we should have had 3 years ago. Best COD campaign in years, and I genuinely mean that. Modern Warfare 2019's campaign was good, this is better. I was originally hoping Treyarch was going to do something new with this game's campaign, but honestly I'm even happier with the fact that they went with this route. They managed to blend the old storyline with Mason and the Cold War with new faces like Bell and Adler. Once again, I'm glad. Because it works exceptionally well, and despite the fact that this campaign is really short, it's short but sweet, and it's further evidence that a really good 4-hour story is better than a 30-hour story that continuously drags. Treyarch really went all out with this, and I'm still pleasantly surprised enough to call this the best COD campaign in a really long time. It might even be a contender for top 5 COD campaigns if I'm being completely honest, but I'm not sure I've thought about it enough to say. Anyways, campaign is good. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to start talking about zombies. First off, I'd like you to bear in mind the fact that support for Cold War zombies is still currently going on, and we only have 2 official zombies maps with 1 new one on the way and 1 big new zombies related mode called Outbreak, which is something I'll talk about. Something I did say in the first impressions video way back in November, but I feel the need to reiterate, is the fact that if you played a lot of BO3 zombies or something like that and you're buying this game specifically for the zombies, I need you to know, if you didn't already, that Cold War Zombies is insanely different to anything Treyarch has done with the mode up to this point. It's kind of different in terms of its gameplay, it's different stylistically, it has a brand new storyline different to the Ether storyline of old, the ray gun is actually good again, it even has a different UI with some interesting choices from Treyarch themselves, like this weird feature where when someone presses the pause button, it pauses for everybody. Now, I'm not about to lie and say that I didn't have some fun trolling some friends with that, but honestly, why is it a feature? It has no reason to be there. I haven't seen a feature of that sort in a multiplayer game since Saints Row 2's multiplayer. Stop it, you're a AAA game from 2020, it's weird. Like practically every other thing about this game that I've brought up to this point, there's a lot of things that it does both right and wrong, and we're gonna talk about like all of those because we kinda have to. I'll start off by talking about the gameplay aspects of the mode themselves, and then talking about the 2 currently available maps individually, and also the Outbreak mode that Treyarch introduced. Starting off, the gameplay aspects include a lot of changes. First off, there's a weapon variant system. Treyarch did something weird with Cold War Zombies, but honestly it works. They introduced a class system to the game, meaning you don't have to use the starting pistol for it, but also instead of straight up just making starting SMGs or assault rifles downright stupid overpowered, they introduced a rarity system. The starting weapons are all common tier, represented by the color red, and these weapons serve for earlier rounds and nothing more. Across the map, through wall guns or the mystery box, you can get weapons from different rarities that can range in quality from absolutely abysmal to actually broken. Another thing I feel the need to bring up is Pack-a-Punch. Pack in Cold War is slightly different, but not really. You can pack your weapon up to 3 times, the first time for 5,000 points, the second for 15,000 points, and the third for 50,000 points, which honestly is a bit much if you ask me, but whatever. Unfortunately, there's no pack animation in this game, which is a little sad and takes away from a lot of the anxiety players would typically face. Some of you might be a little confused as to what I mean by that, so let me explain. In Cold War, you can pack instantly with no animation and you don't really have to worry about anything. In previous games, especially on maps like Der Riesendrock and Mob of the Dead, when you leave your weapon in the machine for a few seconds, those few seconds are the most anxious of your life because you have to fend off with a worse weapon without knowledge of what could come next. Again, in Cold War, you don't really have any of that because you get the packed weapon instantly and everything is fine. As far as perks go, Treyarch removed the perk limit, which is actually a really nice, refreshing change, and a nice amount of the classic perks are still there. Speed is there, Stamina Up is there, Jug makes its triumphant return after its absence in BO4, and there's a new perk called Elemental Pop, which more so benefits the weapon you're using rather than it does you. What Elemental does is change the ammo type on your weapon at any random point for a few seconds, which can greatly benefit you if it happens to come at a point where you're struggling. The perks themselves all have these brand new designs and looks too, which is a nice change and fits the 1980s aesthetic really well, and you can upgrade them in your weapon types with a zombies exclusive currency. The exfil system, which lets you just try to escape after a certain amount of rounds, used to bother me a lot, but it really doesn't anymore for a number of reasons. The two biggest reasons are that you aren't forced to exfil at all, and if you want to, it's completely up to your choice, and also secondly, if you actually call for exfil, trying to fight your way through the final wave is a real fucking hellscape. Plus, I never exfil anyways, and most people don't either. Buying ammo doesn't come from the wall anymore, but instead left by ammo crates scattered across the map. I'd also like to point out the time power boosts of sorts, such as Ether Shroud. They're basically Cold War's version of Gobblegums from Black Ops 3, and it's nice to see that Treyarch is still keeping that whole trend going with zombies. Anyways, I'm going to talk about the maps now. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War released back in November with one map, that being Die Maschine, a reimagining of the first zombies map ever, Nacht der Untoten. I can give this map a lot of credit for actually being what a reimagining of Nacht should be. It's Nacht but less primitive and meeting the requirements of what a map like Nacht would be if it were released today instead of 13 years ago. There's entirely new areas and an entire underground region with Pack-a-Punch and Elemental Pop. The whole concept of Die Maschine is that years after the events of the zombie storyline concluded, a group of operatives go to Nacht to investigate what happened, and hence this map's existence. This means that the storylines are indeed connected and the new one is set afterward. I also like how Die Maschine has a similar storyline approach to Call of the Dead, that being revisiting old grounds years after the dust is settled. Something else I also like about Die Maschine is the fact that even though it is Nacht, it isn't egregious and in your face about the fact that it is. It isn't there just to bank on people's nostalgia. Sure, it is Nacht, but Nacht itself is honestly one of the least important parts of the whole map. Outside of the bunker and places like the swamp, the underground area, and the plain, that's where most of the stuff in the map actually matters. Turning on power is based around objectives just to show people how to do it, but also it's not like you have to do it, and once you turn the power on, the game just leaves you alone to do your own thing. Something I realized in my first couple times playing Die Maschine is that instead of the zombies just getting harder by having more health, the increase in difficulty comes more in the fact that they come in higher quantity and increased aggression. While this is a nice change, it's extremely easy to outsmart Cold War's AI, and because of that, as soon as you get used to it, Cold War falls alongside BO4 in the sense of zombies suddenly becoming ridiculously easy. Even the higher rounds aren't really that bad if you have a good enough grip of the mechanics and the movement, and it makes it come off way easier than it should. As long as you have really any idea of what you're doing, Die Maschine won't be very much of a challenge to you. The wonder weapon in Die Maschine is called the Die Shockwave, a weapon I find similar to the Thunder Gun. It absolutely decimates everything in your path, blowing it into oblivion. Overall, Die Maschine is a pretty great map. It's well laid out, it has a good wonder weapon, and it has some really solid replay value. Besides Die Maschine, the second Cold War Zombies map titled Firebase Z released early February, and this map is even better from a lot of standpoints if I'm being completely honest. Instead of going back to old grounds, Firebase Z takes place between a village and Firebase in Vietnam. It takes a lot of influences from different maps, a similar setup process to Origins, a similar art style and presentation to a Ascension, and a similar flow to Shin Onuma. The setup process is literally Origins, 3 different power systems around the map that you have to activate as you're defending it against waves of enemies. Unlike most of D Machine, this adds a layer of stress and difficulty to the map. The boss in Firebase Z is called the Mimic, and, well, look at that thing, it's literally the Markwa. I also like how condensed Firebase Z feels despite how big it actually is. Make no mistake, Firebase Z is a big fucking map, but it feels really easy and nice to navigate through because of the teleporters areas of the map combined with Cold War's movement. It's nice to go through because of how refreshing it feels. This leads me to Outbreak. For those of you that don't know, Outbreak is a new thing Treyarch very recently implemented into Cold War, and it's a large-scale open-ended zombie survival mode that takes elements from games like Dying Light and Warzone. This mode should not work, there is no reason it should work, and if I'm being honest, it really doesn't, but I still had a decent amount of fun with it. My biggest problem with Outbreak is the fact that it drags a lot. It's not something I can really sit down and play for hours as opposed to a normal zombies map like Firebase Z, and the gameplay elements of Warzone mashed into Cold War Zombies feels a little half-baked and baseless without much thought or personality. And that leads me to my biggest issue with Cold War Zombies as a whole, and that's the fact that it lacks personality. It lacks character. Every previous iteration of Treyarch Zombies to date, World at War, Black Ops 2, Black Ops 3, even Black Ops 4 had light-fueled personality brimming with character, and Cold War just doesn't replicate that. You could just say that Treyarch is taking time to build something up with their new storyline, and that might be the case, but at the same time, World at War had its own style and presentation in the first 2 maps without any characters, and Cold War only seems to be trying to mash a bunch of things together, hoping it sticks. And while it does some of the time, its flaws are very glaring and aren't super difficult to see. Keep in mind, once again, this comes from somebody who actually quite enjoys what Treyarch has done with Cold War Zombies and the unique steps they've taken with it, but for all the good things it has to offer, it isn't without its flaws and criticisms. Well, that's it, huh? The last Johnny Seizure COD review has concluded. It's a bit weird for me to think about. World at War was the second review I ever did, and given the myriad of other COD games I've made videos on since then, it's weird to think that this is the last one. I figured it was time to move on, and I was starting to lose interest in constantly making reviews on this franchise, and sure, I'll be missing out on reviewing a few of these games now, like Ghosts, Advanced Warfare, perhaps the early beginnings era I could have made a video on someday, but I hope you forgive me, and it's been a pleasure to review these games over the past 3 years or so. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded as well. I want to thank you guys again for 1K views on the Boomer Shooter Revival. That's fucking crazy. And also, by the time this video gets up, I may or may not have reached 200 subscribers, so thank you so much for that. I love you fellas. Alright, well, my name is Johnny Seizure. I will see you guys later.